All right, how's it going?
Carson, hello. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, this is my second talk of the day. I got another one coming up in a couple hours, and yeah, I like
You're really making a lot of content these days.
I like on my weekends to try to talk to about three people each day, and then on the weekdays I usually do about one person a day. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna take more time to make videos where there's more like script writing and editing involved to share different ideas.
Okay,
But
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoy talking to you. This is our second talk. Also, we've been talking through comments and whatnot. But um, so I've noticed that we kind of disagree, or at least it seems like it under comments, we kind of disagree on what veganism means. And I don't know if there should be a specific definition to go by, if we should view it differently, looking at action or diet versus philosophy. But give me the quick rundown of what veganism means to you.
So I basically take the approach that was, as far as I'm understanding, first laid out by Leslie Cross. And he was like the vice president of the Vegan Society in the UK. And this was back in like 1951.
Mhm.
And his basic approach is that veganism is a principle, right? And it's a principle uh, that entails that entails it being a doctrine that man should live without exploiting animals. And and of course, he elaborated in a short, kind of a short essay that he had written back, I think it was 1951. And so he talks about how veganism is a principle, and you can apply it to diet, for example. And when you apply this principle to a diet, that would mean that your diet is animal free. I mean, some people call it plant based. Some people have issues with that terminology because plant based. I don't know. Some people have issue. So I mean, if you say animal free, plant based, whatever, you kind of get the idea. So if you apply this principle to diet, then you would have a particular uh, way of eating that excludes animals. If you apply it to entertainment, for example, the principle still holds. And when you apply that principle to, you know, what forms of entertainment you will pay for, then you would have to obviously avoid going to circuses or paying for tickets to a circus, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. So basically, that was his kind of point: is that it's a principle, and then you can apply it to different parts of your life. And he also distinguished, and I do too. I mean, I pretty much agree with these things. He also distinguished veganism from like the other types of uh, animal advocacy of the time, which were really welfare related, like which were opposed to like, just like cruelty to animals. And so he distinguished, veganism from those types of he strongly disagreed that that veganism should be construed in those types of ways, that it's about cruelty specifically. And
Mm.
I would tend to agree with that also, because cruelty is not entailed in harming animals, right? Like cruelty wouldn't be entailed in harming humans either, right? You can kill somebody without entailing cruelty. It's still a harm, of course, but you don't need like the cruelty is not entailed in that, right? You can literally slip somebody a pill that knocks them unconscious, and then you kill them while they're unconscious, and they wouldn't feel any pain at all. So there's no cruelty
Hmm.
involved, in my view. Like cruelty would be like suffering, that would like entail suffering. And but you're still doing a harm, in my view, right? You're still doing a harm by taking their life, even if it's done without any pain whatsoever.
Yeah, I think you're doing something wrong. I don't know if it would be a harm. I think harm is connected to well, let's see. Definition noun, physical injury, especially to that which is deliberately inflicted. Um Injury. So yeah, I think the only way harm would be separate from suffering would be if somebody was born with some inability to suffer. But I agree with you that you can do a wrong action that does not involve suffering, which would be killing without suffering.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, I guess we use different words how to um, describe that. I
mhm.
would say, to me it's still a harm, and you
Okay.
say it's something that's wrong. And I
Yeah.
think, in principle, I think we basically agree. We're just using kind of different ways of describing that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm,
as long as we understand each other, that's what really matters.
mhm.
And so as far as what you described, my only question would be the exploitation. Is that just referring to use in general?
So I think that in my view, I think that Leslie Cross's definition falls a little bit short of where I think I would have the definition. So included in my definition, so I generally do like his definition that it's the doctrine that man should live without exploiting animals. I would add without harming animals, because I think you can harm an animal without exploiting them, without using them for your gain. So
Mhm.
that's and it's a minor distinction, but I think I would include that, because I think that you can harm an animal without necessarily exploiting them.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think. I'm just wondering if it's fair to use the word use as synonymous with exploiting. Because the harm isn't the only issue, right? I mean, or do
Correct.
you think the harm is the issue, or is it the use at all? Like, as
I
in
think
humans
hmm,
shouldn't use animals.
I think it's both. I think it's both. Yeah, I think it's both. I think,
Uh,
and I do distinguish. I do distinguish exploiting or exploitation from harm, and I think it's fair for our discussion to equate exploitation and using. So I think that's fine for for our discussion. I think, if there is a difference between using and exploitation, it's kind of, for our purposes, kind of a moot distinguishment.
mhm.
So yeah, so like if you want to use or using an animal, like I think you can harm an animal or a human, of course, without using them to let's say gain monetarily or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, well, the only reason I bring that up is I wonder if, from his stance, if it included any type of ownership, so like pets and stuff like that. Because if you can have pets and you treat them well, then I guess you theoretically could have a circus where instead of treating the elephants and the lions poorly, if you just had them treated really well and you were just showing them to passersby, or I guess whoever was coming to the circus to see what you had. Um, I, in my mind, the idea would come down to that we shouldn't be using them at all. We shouldn't be like holding them against their will to be just out in nature. And so I just wonder what his stance would be, and I wonder what yours would be. I don't know if we've talked about pet ownership.
Yeah, my guess, and I don't know a whole lot about Leslie Cross. In fact, aside from that essay, I really don't know anything about his views. So I plead ignorance in understanding what his views on this would be. But I would imagine that he probably would be opposed to or let's put it this way. I think that he would not consider circuses, even if there was no abuse or cruelty. He would be opposed to labeling that, like a vegan. Yeah, I think he would be completely opposed to that. And for me, certainly, I'm opposed to circuses of any kind, regardless if there is any cruelty, any abuse going on, because to me, it's exploitation. It's using an animal without their consent, and and not and generally, I would say it's not for their sole benefit. It's almost always for the primarily only or primarily for the benefit of the corporation or company or people that own the uh, the circus and rule over and exploit the animals. So I would definitely be opposed to um, circuses, even if they're not like beating elephants with a bullhook or something like that.
Hmm. Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, I guess now that we have that idea out, well, I guess I've heard your idea, and I will share mine, which is not far from that. Um, I think I do separate it. I think there is you can be vegan by action, and it's complicated. Like, so I think there's vegan by philosophy and vegan by action. So when I wanted to not eat or harm animals, and I did it for like a year and a half, and then I stopped, and then I did it again, and I was off and on, and now I've been vegan for 9 years. I was philosophically vegan that whole time, even
Mm,
when I was eating animals.
hmm
I had an addiction. I ate animals because I could not control myself. I
hmm
chose my taste buds over the lives of the animals from time to time.
mm,
And I hate that I did that, in the same sense that I hate that when I was younger, I was raised to believe it was wrong to be gay, so I spoke out against people being gay, and I have a regret for that. I have regrets for many things I've done in my life, but I have regrets for eating animals when I knew better. But still, I had my limited resources of knowledge, of money, of various different things, and I went off and on. But I always had, as soon as I thought about that we shouldn't be using animals, I had the philosophical idea. Now, I don't think we should muddy the waters necessarily by calling anybody that's philosophically vegan vegan, because if the word usually refers to what we eat, then that's what it refers to. I think 20 years ago when I first went vegan, it was the most common talked about thing was, is it okay for vegans to eat honey? And it was half the vegans did and half didn't. Nobody was talking about leather or various different things you wear. It was all about diet. And now these other actions are put in place. So I don't know exactly where to cut it off to say that there's the philosophical vegan and then there's the actionable vegan, where even if you're still philosophically vegan, if you do what Alex O'Connor did and is currently doing, where he's maybe eating some fish, he might later be an actionable vegan, but right now he's not. But are any of us to what level? And we all have our different cutoffs. At some point, I remember people wouldn't get Earth Balance vegan butter because it had palm oil. And at that time, and I don't know if it's changed, but to get palm oil, a lot of orangutans had to die in their natural habitats because of where palm oil was sourced from. And so at what point do me or you become not an actionable vegan if we are contributing to something like that by purchasing something like Earth Balance? So should the actionable side be strictly what we consume, and then we consider the clothing more part of the philosophy? Or what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I do understand what you're saying, and I think this really relates to the kind of modern day clause that is in the definition of veganism, which is which uses the caveats of possible and practicable,
Mhm.
and I think that's it. It seems to be what you're alluding to, perhaps, is the difference between let's say the philosophical um, notion of veganism, as a yeah, I mean, as a philosophy versus versus what you can actually what you can actually know. Or yeah, I mean, I guess it's also about knowing, right? So uh in order for you to make choices that align with the principle of veganism, right, you have to you have to know certain things, right? So let's say, take example, this margarine thing, whatever that you're talking about.
Mhm.
If you don't know, let's say that that an ingredient in there is, let's say, derived. Well, yeah, I guess the margarine thing is a little more complex because an ingredient there is not actually. I don't, as far as I'm aware, there's no ingredient in the product that you're talking about is actually derived from an
Yeah,
animal.
it's more like a crop death type thing where they
Yeah,
had
yeah.
to
Hmm.
cut down trees, or they had to, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a little more complex than, let's say, that actually had an animal ingredient in there, right? And
Mhm.
so let's say a product that actually has a kind of a hidden animal ingredient in there, which, let's say, it goes by some name that doesn't immediately come across as an animal ingredient, but if you were to really research it, you would find out that it's actually derived from an animal.
Mhm.
Let's say, for example, D3 from the wool of lambs or whatever, whatever that is.
Yeah, lanolin.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're consuming a product that has that in there, but you don't know about it, I would say that, you can say the distinction between the principle and what you're actually doing in practice. Um, I guess you can distinguish that in a way, because um, like, I would still consider somebody who eats a product that they're not aware that, there's animal ingredients in there. And I know you're not exactly talking about this. You're talking really more about
Mhm.
consuming products that know comes from animals or has animal ingredients in there, and we'll get to that in a second.
Mhm.
But for the product that you don't know, I would still say that I would say that the person is vegan if if they're philosophically aligned with veganism, and they have the principle as their goal, their directed, if that principle, is like motivating their goals, whatever.
Mhm.
And even though they might not be eating a product that is completely animal free, but they just don't know about it at that point. Now, in
Yeah,
terms of
no,
somebody who, yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think you're right. You have to know if somebody's given something that has honey in it and they're just told that it's sugar, then they clearly, I think even on the actionable side, you would you can't control what somebody else controls. You can only control your own actions, and you can only control them by knowing. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and so, and like, that would be, by labeling honey sugar, that would kind of be deceptive, actually. That would be, I'm talking about, like, if it's actually labeled something D3 and it is
Mhm.
D3, but it's kind of, you actually kind of have to learn about that to find out that most D3 is lanolin that comes from, animal. So,
Yeah.
it's not that they're deceptive by saying D3, whereas, let's say, sugar, if it's really honey and they're saying sugar, then that is in my view deceptive. So
Yeah. Well, I
so I
guess
would distinguish. Yeah.
something more comparative would be there's a lot of candies that have a product that it comes from beetles. They extract maybe a coloring type thing from
Yes.
beetles,
Yes.
and that goes in there. And then also sugar. I think beet sugar is truly vegan, where cane sugar they use maybe some kind of a gelatin or a bone process to refine the sugar.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I don't think it's all uh, white sugars that are filtered through bone char, but apparently, some of the stuff is hard to know exactly, right? Because we're
yeah.
getting this from sources that might not be the most reliable, and that's a whole other
Mhm.
discussion, I
Yeah.
guess. Because just as a sort of an aside, like, there's this there's this narrative that's going on within the vegan community, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but there's
Mhm.
this narrative that's going on in the vegan community that that when the issue of B12 is brought up, as a kind of gotcha by the vegan, many, I shouldn't say the vegan community, I should say many in the vegan community. They say, oh yeah, but animals, are fed B12. The animals that you're eating are fed B12, and I don't know if that's true. And I don't think that's necessarily true in some cases, or even many cases. Sure, there is, of course, evidence that uh, some farms use a B12 supplement for cows, for example,
Mhm.
and they put it in the feed. But I don't know. I have not ever seen any evidence that this is the case for all animals, or even a majority of animals, right? But it's touted out by many vegans that I know as if it is the unassailable truth that all animals, who are raised on these types of industrial type farms, or even small, I guess even smaller family type farms, are supplemented with B12. At least that's what I've been seeing too much of. Now
Yeah.
there probably are some people who are more nuanced about it, like I am. I'm more nuanced about it, because I'm not saying that all animals, and I don't throw that out as a response to the B12 thing, because if it does turn out to be that it's just some animals, it's actually not a great response. And anyway, so
Yeah.
that was sort of an aside, but
I've done some research on that if you want to hear a quick little bit about
sure,
it.
sure, yeah,
So essentially there's an element within soil called cobalt.
yeah,
And inside certain mammal stomachs, including cows, the cobalt will be turned into B12 by
yeah,
bacteria in their stomach.
hmm
And so farmers will add cobalt to the feed, if it's factory farms, because they're not eating grass from dirt, it's depleted lands, all this stuff. So I'm guessing more the grass fed type cows, or at least some of them that are free roaming and actually eating grass, they probably don't need to be given the cobalt, where others do. I think it's a large percentage of farmers give cobalt
hmm hmm
to them. And but here's the fascinating thing. Are you familiar with Dr. Michael Greger from Nutrition Facts?
yes, hmm
Okay, so I love him. I still do, even though I found out this issue that I think he might be wrong about. I
mm
remember hearing him talk about B12 over the years, saying how humans used to get it in water or
mm
unclean, unwashed food.
right,
Um, but now that we've cleaned the water and to not get cholera, now we washed away the B12 too, so we have to get it this other way. But I've researched it and I cannot find any other answer other than in a human stomach, the nutrients that we can take in happen in the small intestine. And in human stomachs, the large intestine is where the bacteria can turn the cobalt into B12. But
mm
once you reach the large intestine, we can't absorb those nutrients anymore.
hmm
So
hmm
humans and all primates, their feces are full of
hmm
B12, but
hmm
they cannot make the B12 in their own bodies. So apes will actually like eat some of their own feces because
mm
they can detect that there's B12 in it and they desire it. I
mm
don't know if humans were ever desperate enough way back in like caveman days to do that, but it does turn out that we never got it any other way other than something that we can't make it ourselves in our own bodies.
that seems to make a lot of sense. And I guess if there's any person who is going to be like a feces eater, maybe it's like Tim Sheaf can start that whole. I don't know if you know who Tim Sheaf is.
I don't, but he sounds
Uh,
interesting. I'll have to check
uh,
him out. But to get back on track real quick, the when I was talking about the orangutan thing and the earth balance, I think maybe what it would be more comparative to is maybe testing makeup products on bunnies or something,
mm,
where we're doing this act that we know is harming animals, but the thing that we're consuming does not have any animal product in it. So you can eat this butter that has palm oil. Actually, a lot of things have palm oil, but you can know that you're not consuming anything animal related, but an animal is being hurt to do it. So if we justify the orangutan dying almost accidentally, like field deaths, like crop deaths, then I don't know if it's fair to say that if you buy makeup that's tested on animals, that it's not vegan unless we're getting more philosophical with it.
Yeah, I guess there is a point of distinction, right? So, well, maybe 2 points of distinction. So, if something is like, I guess this is the first point of distinction, and let me just jot down what the other one I wanted to mention. Hold on one sec.
Yeah, you're fine. I love taking notes while talking. I have a little notepad next to me.
As I was writing on the second point I wanted to bring, I kind of forgot my first one. Anyway, so let me go on to the second point. So I think there's a distinction between a process and a process that, let's say, the process of obtaining an ingredient that is a plant ingredient, and then that ingredient is, not derived from animals. So let's say the vegan, so-called vegan margarine, whatever, versus the testing on animals. I think I would distinguish in that the so the and I don't know to what extent palm oil, and I think this kind of goes back to the whole like the farmed animals being fed cobalt. I think that there is, like, I'm not aware of any like real hardcore studies which like really go into depth in what percentage or how much of the palm oil is obtained through practices which are killing or making cruel actions towards the to the primates. So you can do a process of collecting palm oil without, right? There's no entailment in collecting, from what I understand. There's no entailment from harvesting palm oil that requires you to harm primates or any animals. But if you're testing on animals, right, and you're required to do so, right, by, let's say, by the law, which I think is, I guess I don't know enough about what is necessarily required by laws to produce cosmetics. But if it's the case, yeah, I guess it's not required, because there are cosmetics that are free from, free from animal testing. So yeah, of course, it wouldn't be required by law.
I think what it is there's harmful chemicals that in certain amounts can be harmful to human skin, and therefore by law you have to have you have to make it be a level that's not harmful. So they'll have a certain amount of this chemical they might want in their product. They'll test it on the animals. If it hurts the animals, they'll lower the dosage, and then they'll keep lowering it until it doesn't hurt the animal, and then it's safe for humans to use.
Yeah, and
where the vegan cosmetic companies just won't use that chemical at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but you make a good point. I think you're right. I think you're right that there is a huge difference between wanting to get a product that might be, say, in a tree where the only trees that they're in happen to be this small area where if you go to get any, you're going to be harming the homes of this animal, and therefore the animal can't like survive in this area without that. There is a difference between getting something and something dying in the process versus using something. So I would say in a sense it's much worse to do it intentionally, which is why I'm not against eating vegetables in fields where there's crop deaths. I but I think the only reason I can justify that is that I do care about myself more than I care about those animals.
Mm.
I wanted to say that as harshly as I could because I think it's important to know there is no other reason. We unless we are wealthy enough to grow our own food and not use pesticides on our own food, and we're not using the farming practices to do what they're doing. If we're just a normal person that has to get by either eating animal products and fruits and veggies or just fruits and veggies and stuff, I choose whatever causes the least amount of suffering, but I accept the fact that there is still some suffering because I choose myself over them. Do you view that differently?
No, I think I think I view that the same, and I think it's really something that's built into us, right? It's our something that's primal in us, right? Our zeal for surviving at virtually or almost any cost, right? And so I think that's something that's deep within us that we would value our. I mean, I think that most people, and kind of tailing off of what you said here. So I think most people, if they were in the plane crashing in the Andes situation and they were starving to death, and there was this person who had who was, let's say, close to dying, and um, I think most people would certainly consider it. Now, would they go through with it? I don't know, but certainly I think it would, because maybe the gross out factor, right, of eating another human, right? So maybe the gross
Mm-hmm.
factor would prevent them. But I think that a lot of people would justify doing that, right? I think there would be a lot of people who would justify, especially if you get closer to these extremes, where, let's say, it's a very old person, right, and you had two children, two young children who were in this plane that crashed, and you know, and the old person, you could arguably say is going to die in a couple of days or whatever, or in a day, but you have to the children will have to eat today or they will die, right? So I don't know. I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people now. I think a lot of people in that type of situation, when you're in that type of situation, would say, "Yeah, let's murk the old person and let the children survive."
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think in when we're not in that situation, a lot of people would say, "Oh no, I would never do that. I would never do that." But I don't know if that's the case. I think that what we think when we're not in these types of situations can be very different than when we would be in these situations, because I don't think that your mind and your rationality works the same way than you would if you're not in these extreme situations. So yeah, so I think
Mm-hmm.
that's so. In going back to like valuing yourself, I think we do value ourselves over generally over, and this is just general. This is not for everybody. I think there's going to be some people who are not going to fall into this, but I think generally people do value their own life over animals, and I think even over other humans, right? I think we value our own life over the other humans, and so
Mm-hmm.
or even the lives of, let's say, our children. If we had children, I think we would value their life over other humans that we don't care about, um, that we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely agree. And so yeah, it makes it so complicated. What makes us call something vegan or not? For example, I think most people would say if you eat any of meat, dairy, or eggs or honey, you would not be a vegan. And I believe now people would say if you buy any products of wearing non-vegan stuff, like if you buy leather or fur, that would make you not a vegan buying those things. but I don't know if somebody would say somebody is not vegan if they purchase makeup that isn't tested on animals, or sorry, that is tested on animals.
That is tested, right?
But they might frown upon it and say, if you ever can afford it, get the makeup that is not, because most vegan makeup it's a little more expensive. My wife only gets vegan makeup, but
Hmm.
it was a while. Like she was full on vegan as far as food and clothing went, way before she was vegan for makeup. And so at some point, somebody might say, it might become more popular to say that if you buy makeup that is tested on animals, you're definitely not vegan. So we all, in a perfect world, I think we wouldn't see animals at all other than in documentaries, and when there wouldn't even be pets and all this stuff, that it would just be,
Hmm.
we wouldn't use them in any way. But since that is so far away, we have to define what we're calling vegan or not. And so even to the level of, like, I know insects aren't a huge deal, but we drive cars and our cars are covered in dead insects. And I don't think I I do believe that insects feel pain. I don't know if insects have a will to live and a care for their future, but I know they can feel pain. But if I outweigh something like my knowledge on an insect versus the benefits of being able to drive, especially the benefits of like an ambulance getting somebody to a hospital, I don't see any possible future where me, a very extreme vegan in my personal philosophy, where I would say we got to stop driving to help animals. So without having any reasonable fine line, I almost think it's more beneficial for veganism, the word vegan and veganism, to mean the philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, and that would really align with what Leslie Cross seems to be arguing in his essay, 1951 essay, which it is a principle, it's a philosophy. And so now personally, like if you want to know my take on like cosmetics with animal products in there or derived from testing on animals, I would say those are products that vegans should avoid. Whether whether I would consider somebody who uses those products to be vegan, um, I would say generally no, and I would say yes if they didn't know, but they were aligned principally with veganism. Like if they just
Hmm.
didn't know, and of course that brings up the whole point about, well, how much should you know about what you're buying, right? I mean, there's that whole argument about how how responsible do you need to be as a consumer, right? Because if you're buying products and you don't know that some of the ingredients or one of the ingredients in there is animal derived, well, you could claim ignorance, but how much, like, that brings into the whole argument, which may be a whole other discussion, is how much
Hmm.
should we know? How much should we know about
Mm.
everything that goes into what we purchase? And so, anyway,
Yeah.
but going back to the like, I guess I'm not so rigorous on who I would say is vegan, because I do think that the caveats of practicability and practicalness, I think they are important, because if we throw out those caveats, then I don't think anybody can actually be vegan um, in any like meaningful way. So I think those caveats are important. Now, can people abuse those caveats? Of course, people will abuse those caveats, but I think they're still important to to use and point out, because otherwise, I don't
Hmm.
know if veganism actually really has all that much meaning at all. Because like I said, I don't think just existing on this planet, just a human existing on this planet, it probably entails, I don't know of any way to really exist for a life as a human, which wouldn't entail some kind of harm to animals. Now, I'm not saying that it's intentional harm,
Hmm.
but you know, um, And also, look, I have been accused by plenty of vegans of not being vegan myself, because I argue that somebody who is for example, somebody who's a dumpster diver who eats food that has been thrown away that happens to have animal ingredients in there, including just
Mm,
flesh, that I argue that they are vegan. Or, for example, that if a sanctuary has a egg laying hens on that sanctuary, let's say they were rescued from a battery facility,
mhm,
and and the hens still laid eggs for a period of time, and if somebody were to eat that egg, um, because it was just, let's say the egg was discarded by the hen didn't use it, whatever.
mhm.
Like, I wouldn't necessarily, and the person who's eating that egg would be, let's say, completely animal free, and would think that, and would hold the principle that animals shouldn't be exploited. That I would say that they are vegan, but of course there are vegans
Hmm.
who would say, no, 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 that's not vegan at all. That's not vegan at all. In both of those cases, both the dumpster diver and, let's say, eating an egg from a sanctuary where the egg was discarded by the hen. So I
Yeah.
mean, you're going to get all sorts of opinions on what veganism means. I don't think there's any general. Maybe there's some general consensus, but
Mhm.
I think it's getting more and more contentious all the time, because I think that, I'm not sure exactly why, but at least 30, nearly 32 years ago, when I went vegan, um, I think there was more kind of like a unanimous understanding of what veganism is. But I think today it's much more contentious and it's much more nuanced. And whether that's a good thing or not, it might be. I don't know. Maybe it is a good
Yeah.
thing.
I think it's good or not, it's inevitable. It's going to, the more people there are in something, the more variety you'll see. I do want to personally answer the two challenges that you just mentioned.
Mm,
So I'd say with the dumpster diving, that one's clear cut for me, because for me, it comes down to, are you putting it in demand? Are you causing it to happen further? And I would say it's more vegan to for that person to eat from the dumpster with the flesh than not to, because if they don't eat there and then they go put something in demand, they're truly putting it in demand. Something that is thrown in the dumpster that's just going to rot, it's not any different than if there's roadkill that is about it recent enough that you can go and eat the roadkill. I think roadkill is very much
yep,
not a
I agree.
problem.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, the idea of the consuming it, it almost sounds as ridiculous as the vegans can't have human breast milk for babies. Um,
I've not heard that one, but
people say it. But yeah, so you could say that if you're talking about diet alone and consuming, then yes, you are not you are not a vegan. You are not plant-based if you consumed that meat from the garbage. But it really comes down to putting in demand. Now the hen that lays the eggs, that one's tricky because I have actually been pondering if I think hens that are bred to be heavy egg layers, depending on their level of suffering from the egg laying, because I hear it takes a lot out of their body to lay the eggs.
hmm.
It might be reasonable to think that they should just be put out of their misery if it's
Mm,
a wild amount of suffering. But I the thing is, if it's on this, let's say it's not enough suffering to put it out of its misery. If it's at the sanctuary, I don't know if they have roosters at the sanctuary as well, and therefore there could be chicks coming from the eggs. That's one thing. If there's no chicks, there's one, or sorry, no rooster. If there's one hen and it lays an egg and takes off and doesn't come back to eat it itself, because sometimes they eat their own eggs for the calcium. But if it lays it and takes off and it's going to leave it alone, again, I can't imagine that being wrong to do unless removing that egg makes the chicken lay more eggs. I don't know if they're more likely to lay an egg because their egg was taken. So I
Yeah,
agree with
I
you on
don't
both
I don't
those.
know the answer to that either, but yeah, my hypothetical about the egg was really uh, kind of described in your latter situation where the hens and roosters are separated, where the hen is not in such a horrible state of condition where where they're just suffering grossly all the time, but they're basically happy. They're happy hens. They're healthy, but they still lay eggs. And it's discarded. They're separated from the roosters. Blah blah blah. I mean, 'cause I've been on sanctuaries where this happens. Like they do get separated for much of the time, whatever. And then they do lay an egg, and they discard it. And uh, I don't know if I don't know if it's in every case that if that happens where they discard an egg, that this entails that they will have to produce additional eggs for that egg that they discarded or something of that kind. But let's say it
Mhm.
doesn't. Somebody's at the door. I'm not going to get
Mhm.
that. But let's say it doesn't. I would find, and I knew a sanctuary where this actually happened, so that's why I brought it up, where the people who were hired on this sanctuary were not vegans, right? They were not vegans. It was a prison work release program that they were taking part of, and the owner of the sanctuary um, allowed them to, and of course he screened them very strongly, and they were allowed to work on the sanctuary, animal sanctuary, even though they were not vegan. But of course, they had to stipulate that while they're working on the sanctuary, they would not eat any animal products. That of course they would, the care of the animals a priority, et cetera, et cetera. And there were a couple of times that a hen had discarded, apparently had discarded, or well, probably more than one hen, but there was like a couple of occasions where there was an egg that was discarded, and one of the employees, asked if he could. I don't remember exactly the details because I wasn't there. I kind of heard it secondhand, whatever. But I think they, took it off sanctuary and they ate it or something like that. And so, like, I don't have a. I think that's still like I would consider the sanctuary owner vegan for allowing that to happen, allowing the worker to take the discarded egg
Mhm.
and like eat it off the property. Yeah,
Yeah.
but there are people, I've had people who say basically that any kind of consumption of animal product, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what, that you're not vegan if you condone that.
Oh, definitely not. Well, if anything, it's more vegan to do it. I worked at a grocery store a while back, and we every once in a while we'd get orders that were like wrong orders that we couldn't sell, but it was good food. And so we
Mm,
got this pack of like this very fancy cheese, and there was like a wild amount. I don't even know, even cheese eaters. I don't know how they could eat all this cheese, but it was this huge thing of cheese, and they were either going to throw it away or somebody could take it home, and
mm,
nobody else was there that could have taken it home. And I was vegan, and so um, I took it home and I gave it to, I think I gave all of it or half of it to a neighbor of mine, and then the other half to another family member or something.
hmm
And
hmm
the reason I did this, and this was the first time I thought about this topic, was these people eat cheese anyways. They're going to go to
Right,
this, they're
right.
going to go to the store and buy cheese and put it in
Yep,
demand. So
yep.
me giving them this and them eating this, they're going to not buy cheese for a week or so. So there's going to be less in demand. Um, so the more you can give away of that kind of thing, I think the better.
I think in general, I would probably agree with that, with the exception or with the caveat that, which is something you talked about just maybe about 15 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago, which is about demand, not increasing demand. Like if it is done in a way where you're not increasing somehow demand for a product, then I think it's fine. But
Mhm.
if there is, let's say, an overall increase in demand, from doing something like that, or from, eating. So when I'm talking about the egg at the sanctuary hypothetical, I'm not talking about somebody who takes the egg and then goes on social media and say, "Hey, look, this sanctuary says it's okay to eat eggs. This is great. Animal advocates and vegans are okay with eating eggs," which could cause, like, hypothetically, some kind of demand for egg consumption, right? Because if people are thinking, oh, if animal advocates, even if sanctuary thinks it's okay for people to eat eggs, then that must mean that egg eating is probably it's ethical, whatever, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's the caveat, that if it doesn't increase demand in those kinds of situations where you're eating, let's say, roadkill or dumpster diving,
Mhm.
then I think it's fine. I think it's still vegan to do that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, Real quick, since I only have about maybe 10 minutes left, I do want to talk about the suffering element because that is something that we have kind of disagreed on, or at least I think we maybe
Mm,
have. Um, so in my mind, it plays such a big role, even though it's not how I define veganism. Realistically, it seems to be the only thing worth focusing on, unless we could magically make everybody be vegan. And so I guess I'm just curious about how it could be anything other than that. So considering that animals suffer, if they could not suffer and we had no reason to think that they needed to live or anything, if they are essentially acting robotically, we wouldn't care about any of this. Well, at least I wouldn't. If it was healthy to eat them, I'd totally eat them. If they had no ability to suffer and no will to live, they were just essentially robots. I would probably eat them. But I don't, because I know they can suffer, and we can assume maybe they want to live and have a will to live. So knowing that they can suffer, and that seems to be the biggest element, um, I can't see how it shouldn't be the main focus. And what are your thoughts on that?
so yeah, I would disagree with you. I think it isn't. I don't think veganism is about suffering. I don't think it should be,
Mhm.
uh, because they're like for me, what it really boils down to is the experience, right? Like the capacity to experience, right? Like, I don't think having a capacity to experience necessarily means that uh, that you can experience suffering. And what I mean by suffering is, let's say, a certain amount of pain, right? Like, um, I don't think that any and all pain equals suffering. So that's, first of all, that's my view. I don't think any and all pain equals suffering. I think that there's some sort of a threshold, and what that threshold is, I'm not entirely sure for me. But to me, I equate suffering with a some significant amount of pain, right?
Mhm.
Because yeah, then that's just the way I view it. Now, I think that also, like, there are people, right, who have some sort of condition, and I don't know what it's called. I haven't done much research on it. Where, like, I've seen them, they can, like, put a cigarette on their arm, a burning cigarette, and they wouldn't feel pain from that, right? Even though for
Mhm.
us, for, like, 1 second of that being put on our arm, it'd be very painful, right? So let's say, hypothetically, there's a person who has that throughout their whole body, not just, let's say, on their arm, where they can, where you can basically, just light a fire to them and they wouldn't suffer from it,
Mhm.
but they would die from, let's say, tissue loss and infection or whatever, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
To me, that would still not constitute veganism. It would still, so them not suffering, and harming them would be, like, harming them would be taking away their ability or capacity to experience the world around them, right? Whether or not
Mhm.
they're suffering or not, right? So I mean, you could even say, let's say somebody was given these drugs, like some kind of drugs, whatever. Hypothetically, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is such a thing, where they're conscious, but they don't feel any pain. So they're not suffering, right? They're not suffering, but they're conscious, and then
Mhm.
and then you kill them without them suffering, right?
Mhm.
You kill them. So taking away their experience, their capacity to experience, I think in itself is a harm. It's a great
Yeah.
harm, right? Killing somebody is a great harm, and so that's how I distinguish, like, why I wouldn't say that just suffering alone should be the basis for what we see as ethical behavior
Mm,
for us, right? Like,
mm,
it would be, to me, like, it should be like whether or not we're interfering with their ability to experience the world,
yeah.
whether
No,
regardless of whether they're suffering.
I agree with that as well. I guess I'm just trying to, if we had to take almost everything you have to do has to be done in baby steps. That's kind of just how most things are, especially legally, because that's kind of what we're going for. We want to convince other humans to make different moral choices, and then we want maybe laws to be influenced by this philosophy. And so when you look at the issues with animals, you have three issues. I think there's only essentially three issues. There's enslavement, there's suffering, and then there's death. I don't think anything factors in aside from those, because so death is what it is, but the rest isn't just suffering, because you could have something not suffering, be standing in a place, but because it has no ability to leave, we could just call that enslavement.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so those are the three issues. And now you're right, death does not include suffering, but I would say it's very obvious to me that suffering is worse than non-suffering enslavement. So if you have an area of land that's fenced off and these animals can't go past that land, that's not good. The bigger the land fenced off, the better. The smaller the worse, but any amount of forcing something to be somewhere is not good, but suffering has got to be worse than that. But I would guess that suffering, when it comes to animals, I feel that suffering is worse than the death. And I guess that's what we got to figure out. So in the meantime, so I don't want any of those to happen. No death, no suffering, and no enslavement. But since they are happening, and we are going to be working on trying to end fur and end all horse races and all these different things, stuff at like rodeos, and eating meat and this and that. I feel like if we're trying to talk to people that aren't going to change, if we're going to talk to them about changes they can make without going fully vegan, the change, I feel like the focus should be on the suffering.
So, like, you're saying, you're talking about, like, from a practical um, communication standpoint, like an advocacy, like a practical, mm, advocacy standpoint, is to focus on the suffering.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you kind of have to as well, because nobody's the suffering only happens as the lead up to the products that we're going to be consuming. And so if you can't pick one or the other. You kind of have to choose suffering, because you can't just say, okay, let's let them live but we'll make them suffer, or let's kill them but not make them suffer. There's no purpose of making them suffer other than getting the products. So I think it's just I think it's the idea of cutting the suffering back. Like, I don't think let's imagine a cow and a deer. You got one of each, and a cow is on a farm, and it can be the nicest farm possible, but it's a farm. It does not get to roam around. It has to be forced into certain places. It's likely to come across suffering, and it's going to, when it's sent, you got to prod it with a rod that shocks them to get them to go to the right place to go to be butchered. If that cow lives 2 years and it has different amounts of suffering in its life and then dies, versus say a deer that's out in the wild that lives 2 years and it gets shot in the head and it's instantly dead, I have to take the deer over the cow. I have to say that the more humane thing out of these two non-humane things is killing that deer instantly. And I think maybe that's why it's worth a push to focus on suffering.
All right, so I think from a practical standpoint, I'm if I'm understanding your position correctly, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but where I'm very concerned though is that is that the message becomes, oh, that suffering is the only thing that we should be concerned about, right? That's where I'm very concerned about if we're
Mm.
going to be pushing towards focusing on suffering, that we make it just about suffering. And I would not be on board with that, right? Because I remember, because, well, first of all, that killing a deer, even if it's a quick kill, it's still, to me, it's a harm. It's and I know to you it would be also.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't want to push a message that that promotes this idea that just because there's no suffering at all, that it's okay for humans to engage in. There was also, I remember, it's maybe about 20 years ago. I don't remember exactly when I was reading, and I don't remember where I was reading this. So I don't know how accurate this was, but there was some article that I was reading where it was in the United States, where these scientists that were hired by the pork industry were like paid to do research to come up with, to like genetically modify pigs so that they actually wouldn't feel pain, right? That
Mm.
they wouldn't suffer,
Mhm.
but yet they would still, they could still be bred, they could still, be exploited, they could still be killed, they could still be all these things, except that something, I don't know, I don't remember the kind of idea behind this was, perhaps something to do with turning off certain genes that would, I don't know exactly, right? And I don't even know if this is like really of like a very serious thing that was um being looked into, but let's say hypothetically there could be pigs or any animals that could be bred where they're they don't have an ability to suffer, right?
Mhm.
I think it would be a real problem for it would be a real it would I would be terrible to have the pork industry breed these pigs uh for human taste consumption, for human taste buds, for
Mhm.
human consumption. And so I think there's this real danger that if we focus only on suffering, that we could go down that path for these industries, whether or not it's, the pork industry or, cosmetic industry or whatever. They could potentially develop these, you know, methods of producing genetically modified animals that don't have an ability to suffer, right? And so
Yeah. Well,
that's
I
the real
have
danger to me.
it's a danger, but it's also amazing, right? Like I don't want that to exist i- in the perfect world, but in the world we have, if we could replace all farm animals with that, that would be amazing. And then we could try to eliminate that as well.
Yeah, but we don't have to do it that way. That's, I mean, I think that's my point. We don't like. I don't think we have to go that route, right? It's not a either or kind of thing. I don't see it that way. I don't think it's an either or type of thing. I
Well,
think that.
I don't know
Mm,
what you mean, because like let's say that it could be a rapid thing. They could get enough animals for what people like to eat right now. They could get enough of them made in this way that you're describing, to be ready by this day in 2024. And so they're not going to breed any more of what they already have, and they're going to do what they do with those ones, the ones that currently can suffer. And like, so imagine chickens all just next to each other in the big factories, and their legs break off the weight and whatnot. And then all of that by 2024 is replaced by the exact same type of animals, but they genetically modified their ability to feel pain. Now, without being able to instantly turn people into vegans, because I don't know about you, but I think we're trying. The people that are still going to eat meat, it would be so much better to have all the factory farmed animals and non-factory farmed ones at least remove their level of suffering. We'd still want better, but
Yeah, I think the danger is that you're you're promoting and conditioning people to see animals as commodities, and I just don't think that's ever a good idea, regardless of the fact that these hypothetical new breed of animals don't can't suffer. But I think you're still promoting this notion. You're promoting it, and you're continuing to condition people to believe that animals can be used, and that it's fine for animals to be seen as commodities. I'm going to give you an example that I think I may have brought up in one of the comment sections of one of your more recent videos. About this happened, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. I don't remember, could have been a little bit more than that. There was this campaign that I think was spearheaded by HSUS to it was like this amazing, they spent who knows how many, probably millions of dollars on this campaign to get legislation passed, this wonderful, great, humane, ethical legislation passed where chickens would get a couple of more inches, where hens, battery hens, would get a couple more inches in the cages.
mm.
And they pushed it. They pushed it as this is a great thing for animals. This is an amazing thing. The animals will have their day in the sun. It's great because they'll get 2 more inches or whatever it is, a few more inches in the battery cages. And it made the news everywhere. It was a big campaign from I guess probably the most well-known animal uh, you know animal husbandry organization at that time, HSUS, big organization, lots of money, lots of connections with politicians and stuff like that, blah blah blah. And one of I remember being shared to me by a friend of mine, this article at, I think it was the article came out a few months after that legislation passed. So the legislation, I think, was successful, and I think it was just a local legislation, if I remember correctly, just in California, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the certain producers now had to, make their cages whatever 3 inches bigger, something, whatever it is. And the article in this woman's magazine, which I don't remember the name, I think I have it somewhere. I think I have the article clipped somewhere in an old hard drive of mine. But anyway, the publishers of the magazine had asked, and they had published, apparently they published articles on this exact issue for a while, because it was all over the news and everything. And so they were kind of following up on some of these articles that were published and talked about. They asked the readers, now that, and I'm just paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact way that it was asked, but something to the effect of, now that we see that this legislation is passed, HSUS endorses these humane you know cages and things like that.
Hello? I think you cut out. Hello? Can you hear me? All right. Well, I was about to end the conversation anyways, so if he doesn't hop back on, I will just share some thoughts really quick. If you can hear me, that I can't hear you, so sorry. So I'll just be responding to essentially what you said. But I don't think that's the idea that something that's working towards something good could lead people to thinking different things would be a reason to not work towards that good thing. So even something as simple as getting the cages that are bigger, even if 2 inches is not much at all, it's more than what they have. So that's good. They do it. Keep fighting for more. The idea of a slippery slope, saying like, oh, if you do this, it'll make people think that this is good enough and we don't need to change. No, don't let them think it's good enough. We still don't. We don't currently let people think it's any of the things are good enough. We just, but I think we should fight for those things so we can work towards these changes. And I think that's good. I think any little bit helps, and we should do that. We should try to get people to reduce, and we should try to get laws to change how things are done in factory farms. Oh, he is back.
I don't know.
Hello.
Oh, I don't know. Did we get lost or something?
Yeah, at some point about maybe 3 minutes ago, I stopped being able to hear you, and then your image went away. But
Oh.
I told anybody that would be watching this that I was actually I have to get going anyways. I was about to end the conversation, but I responded to what you said.
Mm.
So you'll be able to hear it there. But I actually do got to hop off here.
Okay, sure.
But yeah, it was great talking, and let's do it again soon.
All right, Carson. Good talking.
Yep. Take care.